time. St. Jerome was born in present-day Yugoslavia. As a youngster, he led a life of vagrancy. As a student in Rome, he led a life of dissipation. He tried the monastic life, and it did not work out for him. He only reluctantly was ordained a priest, and yet in his later years, he became the greatest scripture scholar the church has ever produced. He translated the Old Testament from its original Hebrew into Latin, and his translation has been called the Latin Vulgate. Every scripture scholar in the history of the church is in his debt for his translation, for his commentaries on scripture, and for his holiness of life. And this has been the Church in Time.
Hello, family, and welcome back to our live coverage from St. Peter's Square in this moment of preparation for the inaugural Mass that we will be celebrating together on Sunday. And it is a wonderful day, a wonderful feast day to celebrate married couples. I want to give a little shout out to my parents, Mommy and Papi. It's their wedding anniversary. Again, milestones that we're missing to be here to provide coverage for the EWTN family on radio and around the world. Our panel here, Monsignor Landry, National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies USA, Dr. Matthew Bunson, Editorial Director and Vice President of EWTN News, and a special guest, Father Michael Baggett, who is an expert on AI, and I seem to forget your affiliation.
Well, I am blessed to teach at Regina Apostolorum here in Rome, also the Angelicum and Catholic Tech.
Well, we'll get into the Angelicum in a second, but I also know that you have a great gift for celebrating Mass with the EWTN family, so we're so grateful for that, to know that the Vatican Bureau here also receives the grace of being able to celebrate Mass together and pray together. Well, let's talk about this feast day real quick. Just because it's such a wonderful gift to married families, those listening can learn so much about St. Isidore and Santa Maria de la Cabeza.
So many of the saints over the course of history have been celibate, whether they're priests or whether they're religious, founders of religious orders, etc. But today we celebrate married saints from 900 years ago. St. Isidore and St. Maria Toribio was her name, but she's called, in a weird use of language, St. Mary of the Head, Santa Maria de la Cabeza. So they've always been a real model for married couples, and it's not by coincidence that the United Nations chose for the International Day of the Family their feast day. So it's a day in which we remember marriage and its connection to the family, and the connection willed by God from the beginning of love, marriage, sex, and family in that order. And so we're able to focus on this great gift that God has given, the primordial sacrament of God's love for the human race. Jesus is choosing the church as his bride and making a mutual spousal commitment with the church. And that's what Pope Leo and the church are meant to the ministerial priesthood to serve, because the vast majority of Catholics with vocations to be saints are going to become holy, like Joseph and Mary did,
yes,
like Maria de la Cabeza and St. Isidore did, precisely through the awesome gift of the sacrament of marriage and what it leads to, family.
Now, Matthew, when you think about these Jubilees, one of the Jubilees coming up very, very quickly that Pope Leo will be celebrating is the Jubilee on families. It includes children and the World Day of Grandparents, which was brand new under Pope Francis. What is the history of these Jubilees, and how is the World Meeting of Families affiliated with it?
Well, that's exactly right. So the World Meeting of Families goes back to John Paul II, trying to, in exactly the same way they did with World Youth Day, to create these markers for families, for young people, for married couples, to have this opportunity to reflect on the vocation to married life and then enrich it, and then carry it out into the world. A couple of years ago, we were here, I think in 2022, for the World Meeting of Families here, and there were very notable lessons that Pope Francis wanted to impart, and one of them was carrying that message of love, of family life into the world. And so John Paul II, again in his wisdom, understood where we were on the cusp of this new millennium. Here we are into the new millennium, and the message of family life continues today.
It's really important to consider how that also affects life here in Rome. You're not in any way excluded from the ills that affect the rest of the world and society, with marriage rates going down, with natality going down. What can you tell us about the way that World Meeting of Families, or even the Jubilee of Families, might affect or encourage young people to marry, to have children?
Well, I think one of the greatest encouragements is seeing the living example of holy families when they transmit the joy that comes from that mutual self-gift and the joy that comes from constant self-sacrifice, because children can be anti-narcissist makers. They really just purify parents. And it's amazing when I see young people that I've accompanied in spiritual direction or that I've taught reach this whole new level of maturity when they welcome children into their life. And it's always beautiful to see them take that risk. So many people delay marriage because they say, I'm not ready, I'm not ready. You'll never be ready. But the grace that comes through the sacrament, day in and day out, not just in the day of the beautiful wedding, but day in and day out, that sustaining grace is what enables that constant self-gift between spouses and to the children. So I think the living example is going to radiate through the city of Rome. And as St. Filippo Neri often said, if you do good in Rome, you do good to the whole world. So that will reach the whole church, I think.
In your time at the Angelicum, how have you felt that reality, the delay of marriage, young people coming in and maybe worried about one thing or another, really played out? And is that salve that will help the church and its teachings, her teachings?
So I do see the challenge, the fear that sometimes comes as people are beginning to discern the future of their life, that big vocation of how they want to love and serve the Lord going forward. But I think that they find in the gospel, in the teachings of the church, that light and guidance to say that, to see that they are not alone, and to see that they have a whole church to accompany them, that they have other families to support them, other mentor figures. And I think that's so important going along, that there's this ongoing mentorship, and that couples are able to enter into this vocation with clear support and with the joy and enthusiasm of knowing that they have brothers and sisters who have gone before them and that had the same fears, the same anxieties, but discovered the joy of self-gift.
That's the meaning of community. It's just so important, and they truly do become who they're meant to be once they really hit that stride in marriage. I've loved watching my friends marry and become who I know our Lord wants them to be, but their character, their abilities, it's remarkable. Well, let's talk about the Americanness of our Pope, just because I thought it was quite amazing to see the Times Square just light up with a picture of the Holy Father celebrating that he is a son of, as you like to say, Monsignor Landry, a son of Chicago's shores, a son of our shores, which is true. A man who will really understand what it's like to watch a baseball game and eat a hot dog, right? How significant is it that he will have that understanding of American culture and how American culture exports everything? You can be in a coffee shop in Hong Kong and listen to Britney Spears. It will happen, but you won't hear Laura Pausini there. So even though we are the great exporter here in the Vatican of the faith, the preservers of the faith, a powerhouse of culture is the United States of America. Monsignor Landry, how is that something that we have to both contend with, but also consider how it could be used for the good?
Pope Leo has an understanding of American culture that no pope has ever had, because he's a fruit of it. And he's going both to be able to encourage the good and really water the wheat, while at the same time he's going to be able to distinguish the weeds and turn that over with his language to try to bring us to conversion. There's so much good in American culture and American Catholic culture, but there are many ways in which we constantly have to convert, and he's going to be particularly capable of giving that double message. Always, as the Vicar of Christ, he's going to be calling us to repent, and he's going to call us to believe not just as a assent to various truths, but to show our faith, to live our faith, to be doers of the word that he's going to be proclaiming. And so because there's going to be a much greater spotlight on American Catholics because we now have the Holy Father, it's a time not just for Pope Leo to shine in his new white cassock, but it's a time for all American Catholics to let our light shine before all our brothers and sisters in the country, so that seeing the works that flow from faith, they may glorify our Father in heaven just as Jesus wants.
Internationally, because he has served in so many different roles, certainly as head of the Augustinians, but then that long career in Peru. He grew up, as Monsignor notes, in America, but then he's also seeing at times the results or fruits sometimes of what America exports, both for the positive and the negative. So that's one aspect. The other thing, too, is because he grew up in the United States, in Chicago, in the Midwest, in an era of massive transition, the post-council era, the church he grew up in is gone, St. Mary of the Assumption. And he's aware then of the huge changes that are taking place in the American church and the challenges that the church is facing, but also then how the church is called to meet the very challenges that the U.S. is facing and how we have that process of renewal. And I think his choice of bishops, I think his words to America, which are going to come at some point, he said he probably won't be visiting the United States anytime soon because I think there are other places that he's going to prioritize. But I think America is very much in his mind because we are the only superpower left in the world realistically. But again, that's a message he's going to have to us. He's going to be calling us as a nation to account as well.
It's an important thing for sure. Do you have reflections on that Americanness and how it will affect the papacy?
Yeah, so I've been asked often whether this was the choice of the cardinals in response to the United States. And I told different journalists that I'm not privy to any special information about what the cardinals discussed, but I highly doubt that they focused exclusively on one politician or one nation. However, they're well aware of the unique role that the United States plays economically, culturally, politically in the world. And what's great about Pope Leo is that he, like all popes, is Catholic. So he's going to challenge everyone. He's going to challenge every politician, no matter which party, to respect, appreciate, and celebrate the dignity of human life at all stages and in all conditions. And he's not going to fit neatly into the polarized political categories that we like to impose upon our popes and on our Catholics. He is a shepherd who's going to challenge everyone with the richness and the beauty of the patrimony of Catholic social teaching. And that's going to be really exciting and beautiful to see. And I think he's going to bring the best out of the United States and help the U.S. to purify its faults, its failings, its defects. I was speaking with a member of my community, not from the United States. He's from Germany. And before the election, he spoke of his desire for an American pope because he was so impressed with the beautiful initiatives that he saw in so many lay groups throughout the country. And he saw that as a model for how to live out the faith in a sometimes hostile and secularized culture. So I think the Pope needs to fan into flame those beautiful initiatives and challenge whatever needs to be challenged and purified.
I agree with that. I think there's something really remarkable about the witness that the American church has to share. A very young church, as you mentioned, in terms of history, Matthew, but I think in terms of faith, one that has a lot to give. We had a group come to EWTN and interview us post the overturning of Roe versus Wade, a group from Latin America that said, well, now we feel like if it can happen here, it can happen in the rest of the world. Now, that's not an arrogance that we are saying that we are mighty in any way, but I do think that we long for change. We long for justice, and especially for the protection of life from womb to tomb, which, again, as you mentioned, doesn't fit neatly into any of the categories that people would like to see politically. Well, Pope Leo gave an interview, well, not an interview, had a conversation with Cardinal Chomadi, who then gave an interview describing his name. And then he went on to speak to the cardinals themselves to clarify exactly what he meant by that choice. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Sensing myself called to continue in this same path, I chose to take the name Leo XIV. There are different reasons for this, but mainly because Pope Leo XIII, in his historic encyclical Rerum Novarum, addressed the social question in the context of the first great industrial revolution. In our own day, the Church offers to everyone the treasury of her social teaching in response to another industrial revolution and to developments in the field of artificial intelligence that pose new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor.
Let's get into Rerum Novarum. I know that we've certainly talked about Pope Leo XIII's legacy, but we haven't really unpacked what that document says and what it does. Monsignor Landry, can you give us a short overview?
So Pope Leo gave it to the Church 13 years into his papacy in 1891 because, as Pope Leo XIV was saying, there was an industrial revolution. And so workers were leaving their farms and going to the cities. There was a different type of work. There was a different type of disconnect between the fruits of their labor and the ones who would be profiting from their labor. It was a massive change in the way that people would look at themselves as workers. And then you had the whole question about the power that was being amassed in the owners of these companies versus the workers. A lot of the times they were being instrumentalized. And so he very much promoted the right of people to come together in what we would now call labor unions in order to be able to have conversations about their rights and about working hours and the whole rest of it. And so he set forward this response of the Church to what would become communism. I mean, because we were starting to see socialism raise its head at that time, so he wanted to give a much better antidote to it. But he set in motion this application of the Church's moral theology to much larger questions like work, like companies, like industrialization. And so the principles that he's given us there do apply to the situation of business, to the situation of work, to the situation of coming together in communities of workers. And John Paul II eventually would build on that a century later in his document Centesimus Annus, in which he would give the whole Church a human focus on work. So the most important part of work was not actually what we produce, like a table. Most important part of work is when we bring to perfection the summit of God's creation, which is the human person. That when we do something well, we build ourselves. When we do something shoddy, we begin, in a sense, to subtract from the image of God within us. And so that's the history that's now 134 years old, of which Pope Leo is going to be profiting as he turns to the new revolution he's just indicated, which is the digital revolution, most highlighted by the changes with artificial intelligence.
And we'll get into the AI revolution in a second, but Matthew, I would love for you to put into context then that legacy. How will Pope Francis's thoughts on work, the dignity of the human person, etc., influence the continuity with this new papacy, right, knowing that this is such a focus?
One of the things that Pope Leo XIV has made very clear is that he is pulling in threads from all of his, especially most recent predecessors. So we already have references to Paul VI, who wrote social encyclicals. John Paul II, I think, is especially notable here, leading into Pope Francis, of the threats that modern technology, but also the modern economic systems can pose, both rampant capitalism, but especially socialism and communism, on the human person, the dignity of work and the dignity of the worker. Pope Francis then, in his concerns, especially in a document like Fratelli Tutti, where he's seeing the impact of globalization, we saw that also in Benedict XVI, when Caritas and Veritate. What Pope Leo is going to be doing, I think, is pulling in all of those different threads into the idea of work and the impact on human dignity, the dignity of the worker, under the threat of these new technologies, in exactly the same way that Leo XIII was concerned about the threats to family life, human dignity by mass industrialization in the 19th century. Now in the 21st century, we have these new threats. I'm looking forward to seeing what he says about this, especially because we are already seeing the impact it's having on society itself, culture, civilization, even everything down to truth and beauty.
Well, Father Michael Baggett, let's listen to what Pope Leo had to say about AI, and then I'd love your reaction.
As you know, communication is not only the transmission of information, but it is also the creation of a culture. of human and digital environments that become spaces for dialogue and discussion. In looking at how technology is developing, this mission becomes ever more necessary. I am thinking in particular of artificial intelligence, with its immense potential, which nevertheless requires responsibility and discernment in order to ensure that it can be used for the good of all, so that it can benefit all of humanity. This responsibility concerns everyone, in proportion to his or her age and role in society.
Benefiting all of humanity, making sure that everyone has the benefit and not just the risk of this kind of technology. You're an expert in AI. You're an expert and also have been counseling during Pope Francis's papacy, the Vatican on this issue and how to encounter it. What can you tell us about what Pope Leo meant?
Well, I'm very excited because I collaborate with a group called the Builders AI Forum. We had our first meeting in the Vatican in the fall, and we brought together leading experts who are developing AI systems, especially at the service of the church, those who are investing in it, philosophers, theologians, leaders in Catholic apostolates, and we were trying to find the best way to go forward and put the technology truly at the service of the human person, which was a constant refrain in Pope Francis' teaching. We were thrilled with Pope Francis's leadership and guidance on these topics, and we were a bit afraid that his successor might not give the same emphasis to those themes, and we were relieved and thrilled to hear the words of Pope Leo. If Pope Leo XIII was called to navigate the church through the modern world, Pope Leo XIV is called to navigate the church in this postmodern world, in which, as Matthew was saying, even fundamental notions of truth and beauty are being called into question. We know how often we are now deceived or manipulated by the misuse of AI systems. And so the church is already working in various sectors to put AI at the service of the truth. So I'm heavily involved with Magisterium AI, one particular example of this, and it is a resource for people around the world to ask serious questions about the faith. And this system has been meticulously trained and focused on magisterial documents and on sound theology. And what a joy to see user feedback. So many people who had questions, concerns, or were just curious about what the church had to say, in moments were exposed to the patrimony of the church with reliable sources that were cited and that they could easily read in their original context. This is just one small example of how AI is already being used at the service of truth, at the service of goodness, and helping people to discover the beauty of what the church has to offer. And we just want to continue that work, and we want to collaborate more and more with other large language models so that when people go to these other systems, they're being directed to a system that is well-trained and that is going to be reliable. And that's what we want to do. Not just throw up our arms and say, this is scary, run away, but to be active leaders in this field. And I am convinced, based on all the people I collaborate with, that the church can and should be a leader in this. The church is an expert in humanity. She knows who the human person is. She appreciates the rich complexity of the mystery of the person, and she can give sound guidance on who the person should become. That's what we need. We need the anthropological and ethical foundations. The church has already produced a wonderful document through the collaboration of leading scholars, Antiqua et Nova, that looks systematically at the anthropological and ethical principles that should guide AI, and then starts to break it down into really helpful categories. AI in education, AI in military, AI in family, AI in relationships, AI in religion, AI in the environment. So Pope Leo XIV is working on solid ground, and he's going to show how the church is an expert in humanity and can inform these conversations to make sure that we avoid the manipulation, the deception, and all of the other misuses that are out there.
Now, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but when I was here in January at a conference at Santa Croce, we had Daniela Raza here who helped to convene all of these communicators. I mentioned how we're already 25 years into AI. Anyone who thinks that this is a new thing is not paying attention.
Right.
Algorithms have been guiding people on Facebook, on social media platforms that have existed for over 20 years and have access to young people,
Yes.
minors. This is an issue that is not new. It's an issue that is well developed in terms of where the technology has gone. And like Clay Christensen, who is the father of disruption, the late Clay Christensen, who passed away right before COVID, it was really sad. I had the pleasure of hearing his thoughts on what technology was doing as a disruptor, especially artificial intelligence and being able to manipulate the human person. And so when you think about that and how it affects the church's outreach, are we already behind? Will we be able to catch up?
Montse, those risks that you identify are real, and I've experienced them in my academic work and my pastoral ministry. You're right. We've already lived through a first major age of AI with algorithm-driven social media. And we know that, unfortunately, many companies have opted for an engagement model, which has generated an attention economy. They thrive on captivating our attention in very unhealthy, almost addictive, and sometimes flat-out addictive ways. This attention economy is distracting us from deeper reflection and is engripping us and has been a source of tremendous manipulation. I already see how this new wave of AI is expanding the attention economy into the affection economy. Imagine the companies that are already generating supposed companions, your best friend who's always available, who never complains, who you can contact in any moment of the day, who is always there to affirm and even flatter you if you choose. Even an AI lover who can supply that kind of affirmation that we long for. This attention economy is expanding into the affection economy, and companies are already manipulating our human vulnerabilities. If they can capture not only our attention, but also our affection, not only our mind, but also our heart, then they can readily manipulate us and move us for economic gain or to promote a particular political, philosophical ideology. That threat is real, it's already present, and we're going to need to navigate that. Thankfully, the church is a model of communion. The church knows the human heart. The church knows that we are made out of love and for love. And so the church should be constantly in our parishes, in ecclesial movements, in all other aspects, a place of welcome, a place of love, so that people who are being manipulated and being drawn to friendship or romance with AI systems can find true interpersonal exchange. People who are always there, who understand them in their limits, their weakness, even their sinfulness, who welcome them and give them that support and that communion to then be challenged.
That's right. That's right. Monsignor Landry, I like to call Mother Angelica the great disruptor of cable TV. I think that she walked in with a new proposition, a new understanding, and was truly American in that sense. Might that entrepreneurial vision be something that the church wants to draw on to be able to walk into this, what I say isn't new, but new understanding of the human person and technology?
We have to take advantage of the opportunity. It is a gift that we can use well. If St. Paul were preaching the gospel in 2025, he would be studying AI rather than making tents, in my opinion, in order to be able to take full advantage of it. And we just saw a dramatic metamorphosis of Debbie Downer into Debbie Upper on our set, because that's one of the gifts of having an American Pope, because he's going to be able to speak in direct language to the most entrepreneurial culture that's ever lived. For us to be able to find not just technical solutions, which are always going to be important, but human solutions that make the situation better for human beings, so that we're not collapsing into addiction, so that we're not being enslaved by affective or any other type of manipulation. And so, yes, we have to put our minds together. I'm very happy that the church is not behind the curve of history, but on the tip of the white wave. And so we've got to stay there. But listen, a 69-year-old successor of St. Peter isn't going to be able to do it alone.
That's right.
When he was Cardinal Prevost, he didn't give a lot of interviews, but the ones he did, there tends to be a lot of gold in those interviews. And one of them talked about the use of social media. He's very aware of all of it, which is, to me, so interesting given his years in missions in Peru. You'd think somebody that he would be isolated, but no, he was very keen on that. And he used a word that I think is going to be very important in the coming years, and that's formation. That we have to form the users of social media in a way that prepares them and doesn't inoculate them, but gives them the tools to utilize social media AI in a way that does not destroy them, doesn't create addictions, but actually then allows them in their use of social media to evangelize in their own way. You used the word from St. Paul, tent. AI is itself a huge tent, but the church is an even bigger one.
It is.
So I'm a convert to the faith, and I came into the church and I needed to start exploring, and I went to the internet. And thanks be to God, I found tremendous resources. I found Catholic Answers. I found EWTN. I found other great websites online. In God's providence, I would not be sitting here dressed the way I am in front of St. Peter's Basilica, and this is a real backdrop. This is not AI generated, thanks be to God. I would not be where I am today without the mediation of the internet, without all of the hard work of those theologians, those apologists and others who produce great material. And I'm so excited that just a few decades later, that richness is even more accessible. It can be accessed in the device sitting in our pockets right now. And with these AI tools like Magisterium AI and many others who are offering similar services, users can go even more directly to the questions most on their heart. They can ask about the Eucharist, they can ask about Mary, they can ask about the problem of evil, and they're going to be directed exactly to the right document, exactly to the right teaching from the Pope, from the Magisterium, and then they'll be able to do the deeper study. Then they'll be able to read the whole documents. Because when I first went to the Vatican website, it was great, but I was overwhelmed by all these Latin titled documents, and I didn't know where to start.
Right.
But now these systems are directing users, when they're well trained, when they're well designed, they're directing people with serious questions to the right sources, and then they can follow up. And I also want to highlight the fact that groups like Magisterium AI are working hard on the transition from the digital to the analog, from the online resource, the AI system, into the real-life, messy world of Christian living and Christian community. Magisterium AI and others want people to move, after they have their initial questions answered, into real-life contact. They want people to go to parishes.
Because encounter is the only way that they'll actually be able to live the Christian life. One thing is to read about it, and another thing is to live it. And I know Pope Francis certainly talked about that, and Pope Leo will build on that as well. Well, family, I know that we could continue this conversation for another hour, which would be fantastic. And you can catch us all online, I would say. Follow us for more information about how this AI revolution is going to continue to be led by the church in a beautiful way. And we want to remind you that you can tune in to EWTN news programs for more coverage tomorrow on Friday. And then we will have a special on Saturday, and on Sunday, our coverage of that inaugural Mass, where we will be talking about all of the symbols that you will see to prepare you for how to live that beautiful liturgy. We're so grateful to be with you here. Remember, we can only do this with your support and with your prayers. Know that we are praying for you from here. God bless you.
You're at home with Jim.